Rosa, welcome to the Roadman podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Has it sunk in, yes, that you won the biggest gravel race on the calendar?
Yeah, more or less, I guess. It's slowly starting to get more real, yes.
What does it actually mean to you? Is it life-changing? Or have you had time to figure out how impactful it actually is?
Wow, yeah, I think this is a really fair and good question. As of now, I can't really answer this question fully or like to the full extent. But I definitely do have the feeling that it does open opportunities. So right after Unbound, or now from the time that I've actually won Unbound to now, which is like almost like 7-8 weeks. Of course, yeah, I think a few things have changed. I had a few conversations with potential sponsors or partners that I could potentially work with next year. And I have a new outlook on maybe making cycling even a bigger part of my everyday life and career.
And how's that working? Are you reaching out to them and being like, hey, I'm Rosa, I won Unbound? Or is it starting to your inbox fill up with requests?
Yeah, I mean, I think as of now, I'm still quite lucky, and I've actually gotten a lot of positive feedback. And I was approached by a couple of partners, potential partners, but of course, already before Unbound, I've been working with a couple of partners, and they've showed interest to extend contracts and so on. Yeah, so I think it's a good mix.
I read somewhere that you only took up training and racing like 2.5 years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think like if you want to be super strict, I think you could say that I bought my first own road bike at the end of 2020, and then maybe did like the first like longer proper ride in 2021. So maybe like 3 years is more accurate.
That's crazy. So, like, what's happened in those 3 years to get you from buying your first road bike to winning the biggest gravel race in the world? Like, how have you had such accelerated progression?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that I'm a person that when I start something that I like, and for sure cycling was one of these things, that I really do develop a passion for it, and that I actually go deep dive into it. So I think that's also with cycling. And yeah, I think doing a PhD, you do a lot of research, you read a lot of papers, and that can also sometimes really get a little bit like exhausting mentally. And I feel like cycling was like this thing that I actually did when I started to just get my head off things, right? Just to go outside, do a ride, but not have any, ambitions to race anyone. I actually didn't really knew this existed. Or I mean, of course I knew that there was racing, but I didn't know that, like, as a mid 20-year-old woman, you could go out and maybe race some of the strongest races out there at one point. And then it eventually really progressed, that I think it was a little bit of destiny and of meeting the right people at the right time, making connections. And from there, I joined my first road cycling club, where, yeah, there was a local Danish woman who convinced me to join her for a road race. And that was in the middle of 2022. And I did that because I thought that was fun, and it gave me a community in Copenhagen and Denmark, where I live. And so then I joined that race. And in Denmark, we do have different categories when we start racing. So there's like A class, like on the local level, and a B class. And I joined, and to my surprise, and I think to everyone's surprise, I actually did one this first race that I joined. To my surprise, I won that first race that I joined. And I think it's fair to say, with things that you do and that you succeed at and you're good at.
So, Rosa, 2.5 years from not owning a bike, or maybe 3 years if we take the other timeline of first time you actually had any bike, 3 years from that to winning Unbound. Like, cycling's a complicated sport. You've obviously nutrition, we've equipment, we've training. it's just not enough time to figure all that out to an elite level on your own, unless you're a bit of a super genius, which I think you are a bit of a super genius. But did you also lean on like a team of mentors and local cycling clubs, or how did you acquire this knowledge so fast?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're already pointing to very, very valid things there. And I think, honestly, I think the people around me and the people that I've met during the time that I cycled have severely shaped my entire progression. So, from the person that took me to my first race and showed me how to, put on the numbers correctly on the back of my jersey, and that I actually had to have a number plate on the back of my bike, to my boyfriend who's really into the sports as well, and who I almost on a daily basis discuss about the newest tech, nutrition, to people that have been like absolute legends in the sport and that I had the pleasure of meeting and getting to know, such as, for instance, Annika Langwell. She's like part of my local cycling community here. And she's probably or arguably one of the strongest and most known female cyclists that have ever been out there. And getting hints and trips and tricks from her was really, really helpful also. So I think, yeah, it's really fair to say that the community around you really shapes you.
So, how serious did you get into it at the very start? Like, what's your training load looking like in year one and year two and year three? Like, how did you ramp that up? Because I've chatted to some of the guys and the girls. Like, I've had Sophia Gomez, who's previous winner of Unbound, on the podcast. I've had, Matt Beers, guys like this on the podcast. And the training volume that they're getting through to be competitive in those longer races is insane. So, what was your ramp rate like? How did you get to that training volume to allow you to win in such a condensed period of time?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that I really took it up very seriously in 2022. So in 2022, I mean, to my standards, of course, yeah, we have to adjust this. So I think I ramped it up. So in 2022, I decided, okay, I want to become more serious with cycling. I want to have like a structured training plan. I want to at least hit 12 hours a week. So this was how I started, basically, right? And then, of course, there were these like training blocks where I did more. But I would say, to be fair, on average, it was 12 hours for 2022. And actually, that already brought me like a really far way. But then I further ramped it up in 2023, which was also my first season of racing gravel. I would say I think I averaged more around 15 hours a week. So I added these additional 3 hours. And then now in 2024, so the half year until Unbound, to be fair, I think it was more around 17 to 18 hours.
And what's that like balancing 17 to 18 hours? Because like anyone that's ridden a bike will know when you're training 17 to 18 hours, it doesn't take 17 to 18 hours. There's so much dead admin time each side, whether it's washing kit, prepping bikes. So you're looking at, I don't know, conservatively 25 hours out of your week dedicated to your sport. How do you balance that with also pursuing a PhD?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. And to be fair, it's been challenging at times. It's not a super easy task, so I want to be clear about that at the start. But it really did help me that we have access to all of these new technologies. So most of all, for me, indoor cycling is actually a really big part of my routine. So I do use indoor training, especially for late evening rides during the week, to get my hours in, because then I'm not restricted to daylight. So this helps me a lot. And I'm also trying to actually take care of some of the routine admin tasks while indoor training, at least when I do my lit rides, so low intensity training rides. So I actually found a way to combine this in a very time efficient way.
So what's that look like? What are you doing?
Yeah, so I do some banking. So, for instance, take care of bills. But I also actually do, for instance, rewatch lectures from previous years that I gave just to refresh, because some of the lectures that I do, I record. And then actually rewatching them before I have to give them in the upcoming year is really helpful, just to, remind myself what I taught the students, what the topic was about. And that's also very helpful.
It's funny, I had Alex Dowsett on the podcast, he's previous hour record holder and Tour de France stage winner and stuff. And he was living in Andorra, which, like, if you haven't been, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world to ride a bike. And he said quite a lot of time he found himself still sitting indoors riding the Wattbike, just because there's so much stuff you can do when you're indoors riding the Wattbike, like that, paying bills, watching Netflix movies, whatever.
Yeah, it's so true. I totally agree with it. And I think, as you just mentioned, you're saving the bike wash, you're saving, especially in Copenhagen, it can get really chilly. So I have to put on extra layers. And I have to refill my bottles and stop at a supermarket to maybe get extra snacks when I again hit a carb deficit. So yeah, it's actually quite time efficient, and I think it does help a lot. I must say, of course, I do prefer, especially like the long weekend rides, to do them outside. But in that regard, I would say I'm quite flexible to also put in some really big hours on the indoor bike that maybe some people wouldn't want to do.
We are so excited to announce that we are partnering with Whoop. Whoop are changing the game when it comes to wearable technology and health monitoring. Whoop is a wearable health and fitness coach that provides you with feedback and actionable insights into your sleep, your recovery, your training, your stress, and your overall health. Sarah and I have been using Whoop for years, and we love the insights it provides into our body's inner workings. It really gives us a look under the hood. And you're going to see Mathieu van der Poel, Richard Carapaz, and other elite level cyclists wearing Whoop. But it isn't just for those superstars. All the data is personalized to your unique physiology and fitness levels. If you're interested in taking control of your health and your fitness so that you can excel in all aspects of your life, you have to go and check out Whoop. Go to the URL now, which is join.whoop.com/roadman. I'm going to pop that in the description below, and you're going to get a free month's access to Whoop membership on me. I promise you won't regret it.
Have you played around with heat acclimation? I've had some of the guys from the Core heat sensor on the podcast, and they're talking up heat as a viable alternative to altitude.
I actually bought myself this heat core sensor recently as well. I would argue, from a researcher's point of view, that I don't have collected enough data yet to make like a big claim about it. But actually, going back to that, I think, funnily enough, my boyfriend and we talk about that a lot. Actually, we noticed that I do perform rather well in heat in general. Because maybe it has to do with the fact that the first 2 years I did my indoor training without like a ventilation system installed. So I was always exposed to very hot conditions either way. But yeah, I do see that there is some adaptation potential from heat training as well. And I've actually seen a lot of people around me doing it this winter. So this is definitely also something that I want to explore more. But yeah, first on my agenda is now actually to use an altitude training camp soon and see how my body will react to it.
So let's talk a little bit specifically about Unbound. Heading into the race, a lot of athletes, they do get a little overcome by the buzz of, because Unbound is more than actually a race, it's a bit of an event. And for people that are in the series and high profile athletes like you who have partners, there is also a bit of commercial pressure to be meeting partners, kissing babies and shaking hands, as they say, the political saying. How do you separate yourself from that kind of pre-race buzz and stay focused on the challenge?
Yeah, also a really, I think, important question that every athlete should ask themselves. I think, especially at Unbound, because it was my first race in the US, I really tried to see this also as an experience. So of course I would lie if I would say that I went there without any ambitions, because I think every racer in their nature is an ambitious individual. So of course I had my goals and my targets, but I also did try to see Unbound overall and this entire trip as an experience. So I actually did take the time. I think I've listened to some podcasts from people that at their first Unbound, they were so nervous. They were trying to stay a lot in their house and like just focus on themselves. But I actually tried to go a different route, and I actually made time to visit the expo and actually talk to some people and actually get a little bit of a feeling for Emporia, because I wanted to have a good memory from Emporia, because also when we went there, the weather predictions actually seemed quite bad. So I was like ready for everything to happen on that day. So I wanted to make sure that like I at least, had something from this trip to memorize well. And I mean, now, of course, the outcome, looking back in retrospective, it couldn't have gone any better. I think I really tried to make the most out of the trip.
Like, is there an advantage to being a first-time Unbound participant going to it? Because the athletes have been there 2-3 times before. They're getting caught in debates about South Course, North Course, which has finer gravel, which is more coarse gravel, which has mud sections. Is there an advantage in mainly just being a little bit blasé and not knowing what you're in for to keep stress levels down a little bit?
I definitely think that's true. Because I think people can get into this mode of over analyzing. Then again, I must say, I really do like to analyze race courses myself. So I am definitely a person that would like to know what I'm going to face in the race. So I did do a proper recon of the race. I did watch some of the videos people were putting up about previous Unbound editions. So it's not like I went there, all fun and games and, just entered the race and didn't know anything about it. So I definitely did do my proper research. I knew which sections were critical in the race and where I wanted to be located at the front. And I definitely also knew who to watch. And I think that might be an advantage as a newbie or first timer, because I think in the European scene, at least from my perspective, I think a lot of the European racers that were at Unbound probably knew me, but I'm pretty sure that most of the American racers did not. So I think in that regard, for sure, it was an advantage.
Is there a European equivalent, do you think, to Unbound?
I think it's hard because in some way Unbound is so unique, because I mean the gravel is also unique. You can't really compare it to the terrain that we have in Europe. But I think the race that would come closest, I think, is probably emerging to be the Tracker, from my opinion. But I do still think that somehow the vibe is quite different, and the terrain for sure as well. So I think they have both, a right in themselves, and I think we should keep them separate. But I think if maybe an American would ask me, okay, hey, I want to come to Europe and I can only go to one race and I actually would want it to be a really long and eventful race, then maybe, the Tracker.
So the race did play out, from what I remember, quite conservatively. The first checkpoint is in around mile 70, and there was quite a big bunch left there. There was still 30 or so riders from my recollection. Were you surprised at how cagey it played out? And was the separate start maybe... it was the first time, for context, it was the first time women had a separate start to men, so I think that maybe changed the dynamic a bit. How did you feel at that kind of mile 70 checkpoint?
Roadman, I know how serious you take your goal setting, whether they're fitness or life-related goals. If you're looking for a powerful ally to support you on this journey, look no further than HUEL. HUEL has become my secret weapon for when I don't have time to prepare a balanced meal. It ensures I get the nutrition I need without sacrificing time or taste. Plus, it stops me from reaching for that takeaway menu. I always throw a bottle into my backpack when I'm heading into the city to work, and it stops me eating junk convenience foods, snacking on croissants and bars of chocolate, because I know they don't support my training goals. It's a handy, nutritious meal on the go, and it's got over 22 grams of protein. HUEL is perfect for athletes that don't have time to cook or prepare food before a training session. It's convenient, nutritious fuel at your fingertips, ensuring you hit your daily fueling needs for that session. HUEL Ready to Drink has 26 essential vitamins and minerals in every single bottle. You're getting a whopping 175 health benefits. Plus, it's made from natural ingredients like tapioca, sunflower seed, coconut, and more. The best part, it's the flavours. There's 8 crazy, beautiful flavours. Iced coffee is what's in my backpack right at the moment. You can get HUEL directly to your home. All you got to do is head on over to the HUEL website, huel.com/Roadman.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We were still a really big bunch. Was I surprised by this? To be completely honest, not too much, because I knew the depth in the women's field. And I think, while, as I said again, probably not that many people knew me, I did my research on my competitors. So I knew that there was a quite deep women's field. So I was not super surprised that 30 ladies were strong enough to stick together until the first checkpoint, especially because now we were actually given our own race. And of course, now like the level in the bunch, in the peloton, is more equal. So therefore, for me, it was not completely surprising that a bigger bunch made it to the first checkpoint.
Then DiCrescenzo at some point on her full send mode and pulled out a decent enough gap. I think she had over 2 minutes at one point. Is there a sense of panic behind, or more, look, it's too far from home to go, like we'll just leave her cook?
Yeah, I definitely was alert when she left the bunch, because I knew that she actually was a former Unbound winner, and I knew that her abilities are definitely on going long and hard. So I was aware that probably she's the person, if anyone from the bunch, that could pull off a move of going off the front early. However, as you correctly mentioned, it was really early. So I wasn't too concerned. And I think this was probably the opinion of the bunch in general. Of course, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but that's a little bit of the vibe that I got. But I think at one point when we realized that the gap was going out to more than 2 minutes, we also decided to make more of an effort collectively to close it down.
How did you crash?
So I actually crashed on a descent. It was quite a rocky descent, and I hit a really big rock, and arguably I was probably too close to the woman in front of me. And at this point, we were already, I think, in the select group of 11 riders. So it was pretty late in the race. I think around 30 kilometers, or that must be like 20-ish miles from the second checkpoint. And in that moment when I actually did hit this big rock, I could tell that like the air was like deflating from my front tire. And I think I can't really put my head around how it happened exactly, but I think the tire, the rock, and then I just went over my handlebars. And when I jumped back on the bike, I could feel that my front tire was really, really low on air. But fortunately, I was running inserts. So therefore, I decided at first, because of course, I think every bike racer that has crashed in a race knows that like in the second that you crash, and the first instinct is to jump back on the bike. And I think that's what I did. I jumped back on the bike, and I knew now the course was getting even faster. So I definitely wanted to stick to the group. And I jumped back on the bike, and I actually didn't lose the group. Then I started to assess the situation and actually noticed that the front tire was pretty flat. But I also saw that sealant was coming out at multiple ends. So I assessed that it was not worth it to jump off the bike and try to fix it, because I could, unfortunately notice that there were multiple ends to fix this tire. So I decided to keep going with the group for as long as possible.
Did you think it was over at that point? Did concern kind of wash over you?
Yeah, of course, I was a bit concerned because I looked at my board computer and I could see that it was still 35 kilometers from the second feed zone. And I was definitely not sure that I was able to make it on a almost completely flat front tire with this strong group of ladies to the second feed. And actually, in the end, I also didn't, because actually 5 kilometers for the second feed, I decided to stop, because I was hitting my rim constantly on the downhills, because there were big rocks. And if you don't have enough air in your tire and you descend, you actually do hit your rim, even though you have an insert. And it got really dangerous. Actually, I felt at one point that I didn't really have the bike under control anymore. So I decided to stop and actually put a CO2 in, hoping, of course, knowing the tire was pretty smashed, but hoping it would actually at least, add a little bit of air until I would make it into the feed. So I decided to stop and lost a group right there, put in a CO2. That actually did help a little bit, but not too much. So when I actually entered the feed zone, I was completely riding on the rim at that point, because I don't know what happened to the insert, but it felt like it flipped or something at the end. But yeah, I just made it into the feed zone, and I think that was great.
So what's the gap like then? What's the deficit you have to make up when you come out the far side of the feed zone on the new wheel?
I think the gap was, I was told by the crew, the NV crew that was supporting me, that it was 2 minutes. And I think, in fact, it must have been like 1:45 to 2 minutes, something between that.
How do you go about closing that? That's a huge gap. Is there, how do you mentally stay focused? Are you riding full gas? If you don't get there, you're going to blow? Or are you almost at this stage pacing and thinking, well, I could get a top 15 if I just pace this home myself?
Yeah, I actually think I took the first approach because what I told myself is, at this point, just to give a bit of context for the people who maybe didn't follow along too closely, at this point we were only in a group of 11. So I was basically the 11th rider that dropped back because of the flat end. So there was 10 people ahead of me. And also, it was already after like almost 135, 140 miles in the race. So I was aware that at this point, gaps also to the back must have opened up. So I decided to actually put in a good effort and try to close it down, because for me, actually managing to be in this front group and being able to ride with these strong ladies all day and being in the selection of the final 11, I already felt quite actually strong and happy. And I actually must say that I felt really good all day. So I decided, okay, I don't really have a lot to lose. So why don't try and close this down? And if you blow up, yeah, that's part of the game.
You said you'd studied your competitors pretty well. Did you have a read on who was a fast finisher heading into the sprint?
Yeah. So I definitely did my research also on who to watch. But then, of course, that being said, I think you can't really be sure who's a fast finisher after 200 miles, because that's a bit different from who is a fast finisher maybe after a 3 or 4 hour race. But I did, let's say it the other way around. I think I was more aware of who I wasn't afraid of than of who was the best sprinter.
Hey Roadman, excuse the short interruption. I love riding the bike, but on account of being so busy with the podcast at the moment, I'm now what's called a time crunched rider. I never thought I'd see the day. But I have a tool. I'm using Wattbike to keep myself sharp and on point with specific sessions to maximise that available training time. I have a Wattbike Atom right here in the recording studio beside me, and when I have an hour in between interviews, I jump on. It's removing all the friction points for me. There's no more 10-minute setup, unfolding legs, banging my knees off stuff, getting my hands dirty, the usual connection issues. It just works every single time. The Atom's perfect for virtual racing as well because it has crisp gear changes, it has 1% accuracy, and it has max gradient capability of up to 25%. If you're looking for an indoor trainer, I honestly couldn't recommend this any higher. I've been using a Wattbike since 2013. Honestly, it's the last indoor trainer that you're ever going to need. If you head on over to wattbike.com now and use code ROADMAN10, that's ROADMENTEN, and that's going to get you 10% off your Wattbike.
Recently made some research about altitude training because I haven't utilized it yet due to the mentioned time management and restrictions. And I definitely want to look more into it, and I'm planning actually to do my first altitude training camp actually just in preparation for the World Championships in gravel this year. But of course, there are restrictions. However, I must also say that my university or my head of department from the institute is very supportive. And I actually recently just had a 4-week leave in order to facilitate the racing. So actually I had, I think, 3 or 4 races from weekend to weekend where I actually just traveled in between the races and I wasn't even home. So we decided that it's better to take a leave during that period. And then I just started working again last Monday.
Do you have a thought process? You know, you hear top athletes sometimes in those key moments in whether it's races or matches saying that time seems to slow down. Did you have that experience? Can you recall what that thought process was in the final 200 meters?
100%. And I think, to be fair, I would argue that was the case for all of the women that were there. Because this final stretch, so for context, the finish line in Emporia, I think, is 450 meters, I was told. And those 450 meters, they felt like eternity. In hindsight, when I also watched the sprint again, I had the feeling that I was already way closer to the finish line when I kicked off and started sprinting. And it really did feel long. I think there were so many things going through my head. But at the other hand, I was somehow also super calm, which is actually quite unusual for me because I think I'm usually quite extrovert, quite like curly person. But for some reason, I think there was like a whole vibe and there was like so much noise from the spectators that somehow, it felt like a very, very strange moment. Yeah.
You were calm, but were you confident? Did you think coming to the line, if this stays together, I can win?
I did not necessarily think, okay, I have this in the bag. But I must say that I was very satisfied with the way I rode, and I also had a plan. So I knew that I didn't want to be the first one to ride into the final corner, so heading into the long straight finish line. And so basically I felt like I had like a mini project in the sprint, right? Like before I even sprinted. So my first goal was to be like in 3rd or 4th position entering the final sprint corner. So that goal was already accomplished. And then I actually could tell that 2 riders from team, or like not team Specialized, but riding for Specialized were working together. And I could tell that one person was giving a lead out for the other person or for the other rider. And in that regard, I kind of knew, because I was in 3rd wheel behind these 2 people, that I was in a pretty good position because I was on the right lead out train, right? So therefore, I felt quite confident when I did decide to sprint did I think that I would definitely win when I started to kick? I would say no, but I was very confident that it was enough for a podium.
Now that you are the Unbound champion, there's a lot of perks I'm sure comes with that. I'm sure you don't have to fight for entries into races anymore. You can just kind of play the, hey, I'm Unbound champion card. What's the rest of the season looking like? Are you going to head back stateside, or are you going to focus on building up towards Gravel Worlds?
Yeah, for now, I'm going to focus on racing in Europe in the next couple of weeks. So first, now I have a small break because I did a couple of UCI races. But then I'm going to restart in August with the next UCI race, and then actually do Gravel Worlds, German Gravel Nationals, European Championships, etc. But I'm planning to come back to the US for Big Sugar.
Amazing. It's an exciting and busy season. Rosa, thank you very much. I think it's an inspirational conversation for a lot of people that are trying to balance their training with either work or family or study commitments. So hats off for winning the biggest gravel race in the world.
Thank you so much. And thanks a lot for allowing me to share my story and being on the podcast.
Thanks, Rosa.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video I know that you're absolutely going to love. Click over here and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.